Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to do some more AWS pen testing or AWS hacking. Now, if you're new to this field, there's like three of these kings in the cloud environment. You have AWS, which is of course Amazon Web Services. You have GCP, which is the Google Cloud Platform, and you have Microsoft Azure, which is the Microsoft Cloud offering. All of them offer similar things, but as far as market share goes, AWS is the #1 cloud provider on the back end for various companies, websites. Azure is #2 and GCP is 3, and there's a bunch of other little cloud providers behind them. But if you want to get into cloud pen testing, cloud engineering, whatever it is, one of the best places to start is with AWS, and one of the best resources is a website called Pwn Labs. Now, I want to be clear, I do not make sponsored videos. I get reached out to by organizations saying, hey Tyler, if we pay you money, can you make a video for us? And I tell them, well, if your product doesn't suck and I enjoy it, I'll make the video for free. So I don't do any sponsored videos. If I talk about a product, it's because I actively use it and I actively believe in them and I want to support them. So just want to be clear there. But Pwn Labs is one of these products that's honestly amazing. The way I discovered Pwn Labs, because it's been a little bit before I talked about them, I was trying to find hands-on labs for the cloud that were realistic. Before Pwn Labs, there was things that are self-hosted, which is helpful, but it is self-hosted, takes some time to spin up, and hard to teach people, because if you're teaching someone to use AWS for the first time or AWS pen testing, self-hosted already makes it a little bit confusing, right? So I wanted something that was more like Hack the Box or Try Hack Me, where you spin up the cloud labs right there on your computer, but all of the offerings. So for example, like Hack the Box Business, you can get a cloud add-on. It's literally like $10,000, I think, somewhere in that ballpark, to do their cloud stuff. So I was hunting for something like this, and I was on LinkedIn. Someone actually tagged me saying, hey, check out these resources for learning AWS, and they shared some of my YouTube videos, and they shared this little website called pwnlabs.io, and I was like, what the heck is pwnlabs.io? So I started digging into it and really enjoy it. So think about Hack the Box, but for the cloud, and that is what Pwn Labs is, and it's super affordable. They have a bunch of free labs, but you can get an annual sub for, I think, $200 a year is what it is. Let me jump to my dashboard. For $200 a year, gives you access to all of these labs. Once again, you click and spin them up. You can see these ones right now, guys, are completely free. You can make an account right now, no sub required, and do these hands-on labs. They have labs for AWS. We have labs for GCP. We have labs for Azure, all very realistic things that you will encounter in the real world. And what's even cooler is I think the frequency is going to be twice a year, but for those premium people, we have Thunderdome. Now, I have a lot of the flags on here, so I can't click this because I don't want to show the flags, but Thunderdome is like a red team environment. It's a total of 9 flags spread across AWS, GCP, and Azure, all to simulate real world corporate infrastructure. So it's super cool. It's actually quite difficult. I have a few videos on my YouTube channel. I show how to get initial access and I think the second flag. But once again, this comes with an annual sub to Pwn Labs. You can get access to the Thunderdome. But we are in the Academy today, and we're going to go to latest labs. And one lab I wanted to show off, and it is premium, so I apologize if you do not have a sub to Pwn Labs. You won't be able to follow along on your own, but I'll do my best to give you the full experience, explain everything that is going on. But it says bypass restrictions in API gateway. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to click start pwning, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on this lab. And it says it's suitable for a CTF approach. Now, I do want to be very upfront with you guys. Often when I dive into labs like this, I do it completely blind. I do not prep ahead of time. I actually did go through this lab ahead of time just for my own learning. So I went through it a while ago, and I thought, yo, this was really fun, and the way I approached it was different than what the lab guide has you do. So I thought I want to make a video and just show all of this, show an alternative way of doing it, but also do my best to slow down and explain things, because here's the reality. I know AWS is confusing. You'll see why it's confusing, some of the commands you have to do. So I'm going to do my best to slow down. I'll explain things that maybe don't make sense. And for those of you watching the live stream, if you have questions, want me to dig into something, drop a comment as I go, and I'll try to slow down and explain things. Another incredible resource to help. Let me get him pulled up because I might need to authenticate. So let me just stop sharing my screen for just a moment. Is this person right here. Hello, robot friend. one of my best friends right here is my robot friend. He can help us out with some of the AWS things as we are getting started. But let's go ahead and get our notes set up so we're ready to go. So I'm going to jump over to my notes. I do use Notion for my notes, and we are doing our Cloud Labs right here. So let me just pop open a new Cloud Lab, and this is, I think it's bypass restrictions and API gateway. I'm just going to call it, well, we'll just call it the same thing. Like that, and we'll make that full screen. I also like to make it full width, and let's just begin by documenting what the heck we are doing. So let's begin with our scope/scenario, if I can type, and here we go. Scenario: as part of a red team engagement, we have gained access to several AWS code commit repositories. We'll come back to that. In one of the repositories, we found hard-coded AWS access keys and a development API endpoint. Can you use this to compromise more than the development environment and help increase our access? So let me explain a little bit about what is going on here once we drop this into our notes. So a few terms that I know are going to be unfamiliar. One is AWS code commit, right? And let me just show you how I learned these services. We could ask ChatGPT, but it is helpful to be able to read AWS documentation. I don't know why I typed AWS twice. That's, I guess it is what it is. So let's say, like, if we didn't know what AWS code commit is, let's find out. So it says securely host highly scalable private Git repositories and collaborate on code. So if you know technology a little bit, it sounds like GitHub, but in the cloud, right? So it's a secure, highly scalable, fully managed source control service that hosts private Git repositories. All right, so let's copy that and just drop it into our notes so that we have a definition of it. We'll just delete this right here. Secure, scalable, fully managed source control service that hosts private Git repositories, and we gain access to those. So if you can imagine, if you gain access to a company's private GitHub, you might be able to find some hard-coded secrets. Well, the same is true about AWS code commit. So here we are, we're on a red team, we've gained access to code commit repositories, so repos, think about GitHub repos, and we could have used a tool like TruffleHog, which is a real tool you use in the real world. If you've never used it, check it out. But we have TruffleHog here. And TruffleHog can search for secrets in a bunch of different things, but including GitHub. I'm not sure about code commit, but I'm pretty sure you can configure it to search for secrets in whatever you want. And you can run TruffleHog and see if you can find secrets. So that's what's going on there. Is there anything else we need to explain? Oh, we have an API, a development API endpoint, and we have this dev API URL, and we have some access keys and secrets. So I'll explain some of this, but for now, let's grab this and drop it into our notes. And we will say like targets. So we have that. We'll just call this our API. And now we can say credentials, set up a code block, and we'll grab our access key ID, drop that there in our secret. And now in AWS, access key IDs and secrets kind of function like a username and a password. So think about your username for your bank account. That's kind of your access key ID. Your username in and of itself isn't highly sensitive. You maybe don't want to share it with random people, but it is just your username. So if people have it, they can't use your username to access your account. It's just your username, but your secret is your password. So you don't want threat actors to get a hold of your secret, because if they have your access key and your secret, they can then authenticate to your AWS environment and begin enumerating things, looking for data, doing exfiltration, doing privilege escalation, lateral movement, all of those things. So that is what we were able to find in the environment. We have this target API we found in code commit, and we have these credentials that we found in code commit. I'll show you how to configure these things and how to enumerate, but before I go any further, let me look over at chat. Oh, Scott Knight said, AWS, not my cup of tea. Sorry, dude. We'll do some THM in a little bit. All right, no questions. I'm going to assume that I am good to move on. So the first thing we need to do if we have credentials is, of course, authenticate to the AWS environment. So I'm going to pull up my terminal right here. And the way that we can authenticate is we can do AWS configure. I'll call it profile, and we'll just call it, I don't know, we'll call it Tyler because that's who I am. All right, so it wants our access key ID. So we'll go ahead and grab our access key ID, and we will drop that in. Our secret access key, grab that. And now our region, there's different regions in AWS. So let me explain what is going on here. If we go to this and do like AWS regions, you can spin up resources in different regions, and that is where they exist. So for example, in North America, you can see that we have US West, US East, US West 2, US East 2, Canada, blah, blah, blah. So we have all of these different regions that we can spin stuff into. I'm going off memory, and if we didn't know it, we could figure out what it is. But I believe the resources we need to dig into is US West 2, but often the default is US East 1. So I don't actually remember. I'm going to do US East 1, but we may end up updating this ourselves later, but I'll at least show you that process. I'll hit enter, and then I'll hit enter. So we have successfully authenticated to GitHub. Let me go ahead and just grab that for my notes. Whoops. And if I remember, guys, when I drop this video, I will, getting to AWS, try to include my Notion notes. I'll make these public, the ones that we're doing right now, and then you'll be able to have these notes to look through. So for those of you watching this after the fact on YouTube, if you do not see a link for these notes in the description of this video, leave a comment and tell me, and I will remember then, oh shoot, I need to drop these Notion notes there. So as I take these notes, I'll drop all of these notes for you so that you can save these notes yourself and understand a little bit about what we are doing for your own learning. So with this, the confusing thing among many things in AWS is just typical commands. So for example, in Linux, if I do who am I, I'm able to get my username of Tyler. If I do ID, I can see what groups I am on this machine. Well, of course, AWS has to make it a lot more confusing. To just do like the who am I command in AWS, here is what we need to do. We need to run AWS STS get caller identity profile Tyler, right? And then we see we have a few different pieces of information here. We have an account number. That's our AWS account number. We know that we are logged in as a user, and our user's name in AWS is staging engineering, which, knowing this came from code commit, that probably makes sense that the user is a staging engineering user. But we can go ahead and grab this for our notes, and I will drop those in there. We'll say verifying authentication. Am I in AWS? And we know that we are the user, staging engineering user. All right, well, let's jump back over to this. If we look at our notes, not our notes, but our lab, we have a few things that we need to do. We have this API URL, so I guess we could just try to go to this URL and see what happens. Right? If I just, well, let me just do a curl request. That might be easier. I want to see headers, so I'll do that. -I shows you the headers, I think. And we get a 403, so it's not allowed. We're not able to hit this. Right? Method not allowed. So we're doing a GET request. Maybe if we change it to a POST request, method not allowed. Can I do curl X options? Okay, that works. And so if we do curl options, we can see that it allows patch and it allows options. So really not much that we have to work with, but we do know we have an AWS user, and one of the first things we want to do is enumerate our permissions. So if you can imagine, when you get access to a Linux machine, what do? Well, you should do things like who am I? ID, kind of get a lay of the land. What permissions do I have in this Linux environment? And can I utilize those permissions to find secrets that go a little bit deeper in the environment? Well, the same is true about AWS, and you can do all of this manually, but I'm going to show you guys how to automate the process with a tool called Pacu. You probably see me use this on stream a few times, but let me jump over to here and I'll show you Pacu real quick. If we go to Pacu GitHub, Apologize for the white mode. I don't know why it's like that. It hurts my eyes too. Let me turn on dark reader on. Maybe I'll do that. It messes up Palm Labs if I use dark reader, I think. So what is Pacu? Well, Pacu is an open source AWS exploitation framework designed for offensive security testing against cloud environments, created and maintained by the greatest pen testing company on the earth. Pacu allows pen testers to exploit configuration flaws within an AWS account, using modules to easily expand its functionality. Current modules enable a range of attacks, including user privilege escalation, backdooring of IAM users, attacking vulnerable Lambda functions, and much more. And it shows you how you can install Pacu. It uses pip. The only change I would make, or that I recommend, is use pipx. Pipx will spawn everything in a Python virtual environment. If you've been using Python and installing random tools from the internet for any length of time, you know that when you install one Python tool's dependencies, it might break dependencies of another tool, and then your whole Python thing breaks, and the next thing you know, you're reverting to a snapshot on your virtual machine because you broke everything. It's not that I've done that like more times than I can count, but I've learned the hard way. If you use pipx, it will install all of it in a virtual environment, and you should be good to go. So it's just pipx install and then Pacu. I'm not going to do it because I already have it installed, but you can follow the instructions on GitHub on how you can get Pacu installed. Once we have Pacu installed, we can just run it, right? Run Pacu, and I'm going to type 0 for a new session. You can see down here in my different sessions, we're going to do 0 for a new session, and we will call this one, we'll just call it API Gateway, because that's the lab that we are doing. And now that we are in the session, there's a bunch of different things that we can do, but we need to import our keys. So remember, we set up keys as the Tyler user, and we can verify that with AWS STS get caller identity profile Tyler. So our keys are set up under the name Tyler, and so we want to import those keys into Pacu. And the way we can do that is we can do import keys Tyler. There we go, imported keys as imported Tyler. And now we can search for what we want to do. So we know we want to enumerate our permissions. Now in AWS, user accounts and different permissions are called IAM, or Access Identity Management, IAM. And many cloud providers use IAM terminology. The same is true about AWS. So if we want to search within Pacu for different modules we might be able to work with, it's really easy. We quite literally just use search, and let's say we want to do search IAM. Like, what IAM information do we have? So we can scroll up here. We have a category called enum, which sounds like a good spot to work, and we can do IAM brute force permissions, IAM decode access key ID, detect honey tokens, enum action query, enum permissions, enum user roles, policies, groups, and get credential report. What I typically do is I try to first run enum permissions, but for that to work, your AWS user does have to have certain permissions to even run that. And if that fails, I'll do brute force permissions. Takes a little bit longer, but that will brute force every single AWS API call in order to figure out what permissions we have in the AWS environment. But for this one, let's go ahead and try IAM enum permissions. Maybe we want to get more information on that. So we can do help IAM enum permissions and say, all right, what is this doing? Well, it says this module, make sure my face isn't in the way of the text. I don't think it is. This module will attempt to use IAM APIs to enumerate a confirmed list of IAM permissions for users and roles in the account. By default, the owner of the active set of keys is targeted. That's us. This is done by checking attached and inline policies for the user and the groups they are in. So we have a few options or switches: all users, username, all roles. We're just going to do default because we just want to know what permissions we have. And so we can just go ahead and do run IAM enum permissions. All right, we are done. So we had some failures on things that we were able to find or not find. But now that we've done it, we can run who am I to see a detailed list of permissions. So what permissions do we have? Which I know all of this is confusing. You know what the other thing I did not do is I did not document my command. So let me go ahead and back up a little bit. We'll go to we'll go back to like this right here. Come on, copy. And let me add some of this to our notes that we are working on. Using Pacu. And let's just grab a Pacu GitHub link for our notes. And also I want to just drop this into a code block down here. I'll format it in a little bit, but let's grab this for whoever is a future reader of my notes so they can easily access the tool that I'm using and they can figure out how to install it and all that good stuff. We will drop that in there. So for enumeration, we are using Pacu. And honestly, that's probably good enough just for that. And we'll say enumerating IAM permissions. There we go. So help IAM enum permissions, and it's showing me running the command right there. And then we'll say confirmed permissions. And we can jump back over to here and grab our confirmed permissions right here. Just grab this. All right, confirm permissions. There we go. So if we look at these confirm permissions, let's figure out what exactly it is doing, because I know, once again, very confusing if you're not used to AWS on what permissions we are looking at. So first we have allow permissions. So what are we allowed to do? We're able to make post requests to the API gateway, and you can see we have this ARN of the API gateway and the US West 2 region. So if we didn't know we were working with the US West 2, well, we see that now because all of our permissions lie in US West 2, and we're able to do anything to these REST APIs in order to deploy them. So that means we can deploy APIs in the account. We can patch, so we might be able to update some API information with a patch request, and we can do that to all of the REST APIs, it looks like, based on the wildcard right there in the US West 2 region. We can get the REST APIs, which I'll show you how to automate some of that with Pacu. We can update REST API policy, so we know that as well. We can get policies, we can list attached user policies. This is what allows us to do the enumeration we're doing now. If this was not enabled, we would have to brute force our permissions to figure out what we have. We'd still get close to the same stuff, but maybe not as accurate. We can get policy version, so we have a few permissions that we can do here. But let's say we don't know what's going on here. Like we're new, we're confused, we don't really understand these permissions. This is where our friend ChatGPT comes in. Explain these AWS permissions for me. Let's see if ChatGPT is accurate. All right, so API gateway allows users to perform post requests, any deployments of API gateways in the US West 2 region. All right, here's this one patch. We can perform patch requests on any US West 2 region, both at the API level and for individual APIs. API gateway, we can do get requests, all API gateway REST APIs in the US West 2 region. We've covered that. Allow it to update all individual REST ones. IAM, allow the user to retrieve IAM policies, all IAM policies. Allow the user to list policies attached to the IAM user, and allow us to retrieve versions. So once again, if you were unfamiliar with what we are looking at, AI really is helpful, and AI right here, ChatGPT, can give us that information. And I also keep noticing we are in the US West 2 region, so we might want to change our region, but we don't have to yet. But we know we are doing something with APIs, because based on the scope that we were given for this, if we scroll back up to our scope, can you use this, that is the API endpoint in our credentials, to compromise more than the dev environment? So maybe a production environment. We can maybe do some brute forcing, but let me show you once again how we can automate a lot of this with Pacu. So within Pacu, there are modules for working with API gateways. So if we just search API gateway, you can see we have an API gateway enum. Well, let's see what that does. So do help API gateway enum, and what information do we have? It says it enumerates the API gateway. For each API, this module enumerates available routes, methods, API keys, and client certificates. Results and Swagger definitions will be exported to the session download directory, and it accepts region. So we know that we are targeting the US West 2 region based on all the permissions that we have. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. We will do run API gateway enum region US West 2. All right, so we already have a little bit of information here. Let's go ahead and grab this for our notes. We'll drop over to this. All right, we'll say enumerating API gateway with Pacu. All right. So if we look at these, we can do, here's our documentation. We can do get requests. Notice we have dev, but we do have a prod API right here. So that right there is a finding, right? With this information, successfully found the production API from enumerating above. And that is that right there. So there's our production API, and let's just go ahead and see if we can do anything with that. So if I copy that, jump back over to here and curl. Let's just try to curl it. All right, user anonymous is not authorized to perform execute API invoke on resource blah 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 blah. Can we do like curl X post request? Will that do anything different? And now we're missing an authentication token. So we need to dig into this API a little bit more, but here's the cool thing about Pacu. When we use that enumerate the API gateway module, it actually goes to the Swagger file or the API documentation and policy information and pulls it down for us and stores it in our session. The way we can get that information is we can just run data in Pacu. It looks a little bit messed up here, but we'll clean it up. But let's just copy all of this. This is all, you can see the API information here and API doc. So let's copy this. And let's go over to our handy dandy friend ChatGPT and say, hello, can you please clean this up for me? And let's see if we can read it better. Beautiful. All right, while that does its thing, let's go ahead and add our notes to this. And we'll say within Pacu to get the API documentation. Jeez, I can't type. Documentation and policy information. Run this through ChatGPT to clean it up. And that looks a lot better. So let's go ahead and copy this. And we'll drop it in here. And let's look at this together. What information do we have here? We have our Swagger definition. It's an API prototype for a new service. Here's the gateway dev one on base path API. I have to sneeze. Try not to sneeze into my microphone. All right, we're good. And it gets a 405 response, blah, 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 blah. Put is a 405 response, delete, responses, options, et cetera, et cetera. We can keep kind of scrolling through here. Here's the prod. Here's what we're most interested in, because once again, remember our scope said we have dev. Can we compromise the production area? So if we look at prod, what does it do? Well, we can do a get request. It consumes application JSON, produces application JSON. The response is a 200 response empty. Definition, gateway policy. So here we have a gateway policy. And it says, in effect, it allows anyone, hence the wildcard, to invoke this API with a condition. So think about programming. You can invoke this API if your source IP is 172.16.5.10. Well, that is not my source IP, and I tried to spoof it with X-forwarded 4, and I can tell you that does not work. And when I was doing this myself, like live on the spot, when I was first going through this is where I was a little bit stuck, but what helped me was just Googling it and digging into ChatGPT. So what we can do is let me just back up a little bit. We'll copy this entire policy, and let's go back to our robot friend and say, explain this, robot friend. So the X Amazon API Gateway policy specifies an IAM policy for an API Gateway resource. This policy controls who can invoke the API Gateway methods and under what conditions. So kind of got that. Allow our principal, execute API. So the resource specifies the resource the action applies to. This value is an Amazon resource name, blah, 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 blah. Our API Gateway ID, any stage. But here's the condition. It restricts it to originating from a specific IP address, which is why if I try to curl that thing, we get this: user anonymous is not authorized to perform invoke API on that resource. And we can actually grab that error message and jump over to our other good friend, which is Google. And you can see when I was doing this, there is a Stack Overflow question about the same thing. They got the same error, and they have their policy right there that they're pasting in, which told me, okay, it has something to do with the policy. This is a AWS specific error. It requires us dealing with the policy. And if we remember our permissions, right? So if we go back over to this, back over to Pacu and say, who am I? We have specific permissions here that we might be able to play around with and identify how the heck are we going to exploit this. So let me go back to our notes though, and we'll update our notes, and we'll say, we'll grab this, or we'll just add a bullet point. The issue is that the policy only, geez, why can I not type? I just beat you guys all to typing race. Now I can't type. Only allows a certain IP address to invoke the API gateway. We need to modify that somehow. So considering we had various permissions, which I think I even dropped into my notes here, right? We have post permissions to send post request, patch permissions, get. This is what stands out to me. We need to update our API policy, and we have this permission right here, update REST API policy. And I'm actually curious if ChatGPT would discover this. Considering the AWS permissions I sent you before, is there anything I can do to remove the IP block from that API gateway using the AWS CLI? Okay. Let me look at his instructions and I'll see if it's actually accurate. I don't even think we can run this command because I don't think we have permission to get policies that way. We do have the policy from doing it our way, but let me just see if I'm right. Profile Tyler. And it's not even a valid command. See, AI is good to a certain point, y'all, but eventually you do have to read some documentation. Here, I mean, we already have the REST API ID. This part might actually be good. So what we want to do is update it with this policy right here. So all this is doing is it's changing that policy that we saw to allow anyone to invoke the API. I think let's give it a shot. Worst case scenario, we break it and we restart the lab. All right, I'm gonna make a directory API gateway, cd API gateway. All right, I want to update this terminal so it's Pacu, just to keep my terminal straight. And we'll do vim policy.json. All right, save that. Okay, there we go. That should be a working policy. What it's saying we can do is allowing anyone to execute the API on this specific API in this account. Wildcard means we can do anything to the production endpoint, which is what we want to do. And now ChatGPT is saying we need to do AWS API gateway, put REST API policy, REST API ID region. I don't know if his syntax is correct there. I'll see. Maybe I'm just a hater, right? I need to pass out my profile so it uses my creds. And I also didn't call it modified. I just called it policy.json. Yeah, okay. I did not think so. I did not think that was the right way to do it. Let me jump back over to my notes and look at our own permissions. We have this update REST API policy. Let's do some Googling. Update REST API policy, AWS. What was this? Update REST API. That must have been what I was looking at previously, but both should go to the same thing. So I think this is what ChatGPT is actually trying to do for us. And you know, we could be like real hackers and RTFM read the manual, but you know, YOLO. I don't know, guys, if this is going to work, but patch operations, what are you doing? Okay. Update REST API I sent you. You'll need to use patch operations to replace the existing policy with your new policy JSON. So prepare the new policy. Okay. So we're going to take it off both of them. Create a patch operations.json. Oh, is this just the old policy? Why do I need to create a new policy there? It would appear I'm already adding it here. Does that have prod there? Yep. All right, YOLO, let's see what happens. We'll call this vim update.json. And let's look at ChatGPT's command. What is he telling us to do here? What freaking wizardry. Why do you have to create this new policy? Because you're passing it right there. You're not... Yeah, I don't... This is a waste, I think. I might be wrong. I just want to get this typed out so I understand what's going on here. So we're going to call this update.json. That's the correct API ID. That's the correct region. We're going to do it with the profile Tyler and jump over to here. We got 0xD Shan over in chat. Hello, dude. Thanks for joining us. We're doing some AWS pen testing. Although I think we might almost be done. Let's see if this works. Boom. Did that work? I think so. All right. Updating the policy. That should work, and I should also include like the update.json file. So we're just taking good notes as we go through this. All right, now I don't remember what it was. Is this a prod one? And we still get the error, but if we jump over to, do I still have that pulled up? Nope. Okay, let me grab this error because I think if we read through that Stack Overflow thread, there's another step we might need to do. Let's see what all the smart AWS people are saying. You need to update the resource policy, blah, blah. Also note, blah, blah. If the API has been deployed previously in the API Gateway Console, you need to redeploy it. So I think that's the issue we're running into. We have updated the policy, but for the policy to take effect, we need to redeploy the API. And if we consider our permissions that we had, I believe we had those permissions, right? If we jump back to the top when we were doing our initial enumeration, we had this right here, this post request, right? That permission right there. I just don't know the syntax. Okay, so we'll say, how can I use these permissions to redeploy that API now? Well, okay. Okay, let me take a look at what he's telling us to do real quick. I think our stage name, if I remember, it was API before. So AWS API Gateway, create deployment, our REST API ID, which does match our REST API ID up there, region US West 2. Description can be anything like, please subscribe. And let's give it a shot. Let's see if that works. Oh, you know what I need to do? I also need to pass it my profile. Tyler. Did it work? All right, we'll say redeploy the API rather. And now, can we send a curl request? Moment of truth. We cannot send a curl request. Frick. I must have done something wrong. Let's see if we can figure it out. Together, the beauty of troubleshooting. I thought... Oh, shoot, no, it's working. It just took a minute to reset it, okay. Or maybe I had to redo it again because I did it twice now, but that time it seemed to work. I don't know if I did something wrong or maybe I was too eager. Maybe it takes like a minute for the API gateway to redeploy. That's my guess, but we were able to get the flag. Let me go ahead and grab that for our notes. And we'll do this. Success, but future people, you can do this. There we go. And we have the final flag. Now also, just want to be clear, guys. I did this lab once already myself. Usually, like 99% of the time when I do labs or machines, I'm doing it for the very first time, sharing with you my learning, my frustrations, my headaches. But do want to be clear, I went through this lab a while ago, but before now, and thought, hey, this would be a cool lab to teach and to do on stream to show some of the basics of this AWS enumeration. So if you were a little bit lost as you were going through this, this is not my first time doing the lab, so I knew the general attack path in the back of my head, but I didn't know all the syntax. I didn't entirely know how to get there. I couldn't remember all those details. So I'm showing you this is how I use ChatGPT in the real world as well, especially with AWS pen testing. I suck at remembering all the little pieces of syntax, and so I tried to like piece together from AWS documentation with ChatGPT to figure out what is going on, but that solves the lab for us. But what I love about Pwn Labs, if you've never used Pwn Labs, what's cool about it is you can use it even if you're brand new to AWS, because for every lab that you work through, there's a very detailed explanation and walkthrough as we go through this. So if you were brand new and didn't know where to pick up on, let's go through a little bit of this walkthrough because they actually do it way differently than I do it. Because I use Pacu and they do it manually. My way was easier in my opinion, but here's a real world context. You want to read through all of this. An API gateway is a key part of modern software stacks. Acting like a middleman between users and the backend systems, it serves as a single entry point to handle and protect access to various APIs. Being able to assess API security by exploiting vulns, misconfigurations, and exposures, and learn how to prevent making these mistakes are very important skills for pen testers, software engineers, and DevOps professionals alike. And one cool thing, guys, is I actually have my own lab coming out. Don't know why that's all caps. So CloudGoat is Rhino, where I work, our vulnerable by design AWS deployment tool. It spins up CTF, AWS CTF type things. I have a lab for this that's completely done, ready to go, done with all QA, but it's going to come out alongside a blog where I give a detailed walkthrough in the blog on the Rhino blog that will hopefully be coming out next month. But if you want to try it, you can actually do this yourself because it's open source and the pull request is here. So you can just switch over to the pull request, but it's this scenario right here, SNS secrets. I won't ruin the full walkthrough for you, but know that this is ready. If you want to get more experience with API Gateway and SNS and Pacu, this module or this CloudGoat scenario is what I created for that purpose. But let's jump back over to this. Amazon API Gateway is a comprehensive service from AWS that allows the creation, deployment, and management of APIs at scale. It provides functionalities like transforming requests and responses, managing access through authorization, controlling request rates, and integrating seamlessly with AWS services. I've been doing a lot of talking. Let's look at this walkthrough. So they did the same thing I kind of did with the dev one. They saw method not allowed. They tried a post request, still not allowed. They did an options request, and they have patch. I didn't even try patch, though. But when they tried patch, they got this error. The dev environment is currently unavailable due to unexpected maintenance. All right. So it looks like they guessed the prod environment. As a good guess, we can try to access the prod. You don't have to guess it. So you can imagine maybe it was API / something that you wouldn't be able to guess. Well, with Pacu, what I showed, it would have still found it because Pacu enumerated all the API gateways. And yep, we got the same forbidden error. They found this article. Let's check out what the heck this is. Avoid accidental exposure of authenticated Amazon API resources. Oh, this is just showing how you properly configure your AWS policy so users can't access it. And in this environment, they try to stop us with the IP, but they also gave us permissions, right, to modify the policy ourselves. They configured it. They did this get REST APIs. Is able to get a list. We see a resource policy. They beautify it. And they saw the same thing we saw, the source IP. They want to see if they have permissions to do this. Like a lot of this stuff, guys, once again, Pacu automated it for us. So you can do it manually, but hey, Pacu makes it quicker, helps us understand a little more about what's going on. At least it helps it understand me. Because like even once they got this, they had to check it out this way. They had to get the policy. They had to get the version, right? Pacu did all of that for us. They found the update REST API. They modify the resource by allowing conditional access. They did it with the update. So we did all this stuff the same, literally almost identical with the way we did that. And yep, we couldn't hit it. You have to redeploy it. We saw it not in the documentation, but we saw it in Stack Overflow that we had to redeploy it. You redeploy the API, you do it, and you get the flag. So what's the defense? There are many permissions in AWS that can potentially allow us to increase our access. Sometimes the permissions we start with can be leveraged to change a resource and/or IAM policies that may grant us new permissions or remove restrictions. We should not only assume breach, but assume that a threat actor with a foothold in AWS may be able to increase their access at the application, service, or account level. Defenders can enable CloudTrail logging. Let's do a little bit of enumeration, research into that, to identify potentially malicious API gateway activity. CloudWatch alarms can be created to alert defenders on behavior that's suspicious or that deviates from normal patterns of behavior. Actually, they link the API information here. So CloudWatch is sort of like, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it, but it monitors your AWS environment, right? For the way it would have caught us, in a few different ways. When we first got access, let me actually look at my notes, and I can even point out the different spots that if CloudTrail is properly configured, you can actually have it set up to alert, so you can send this into a SIM or to your SOC team. But it would have possibly caught us even running this command on this staging engineering role or user. Maybe this user isn't one that usually accesses things from the CLI. Maybe it's usually using automation. So CloudTrail log could be configured that when this is triggered, hey, send an alert here, and they could have stopped us there, or at least detected us. The enum IAM permissions, it definitely would have caught this, because remember, it says that this will attempt to use IAM APIs to enumerate a confirmed list of IAM permissions. So we're doing some pretty obvious enumeration. There's even a lab, I actually think there's a lab on Pwn Labs that I did where we put on the blue team hat and we actually use CloudTrail to investigate an incident. And things like these IAM APIs are very obvious signs that a threat actor might be in your environment. CloudTrail would have picked up on that, and you could have had alerting set up in that way. Same with this, it would have caught us enumerating the API gateway. That would have been out of the ordinary. It definitely would have detected this, of us updating the policy, right? There should be a change control board in order to prevent this from happening. Like, you shouldn't just be able to make changes to a policy in production in a larger organization unless it's gone through the change control process and the change control board, and people are on board with this and know that it's happening. When someone updates your policy without any of that prior approval, that should also be an alarm like, oh, something might be going on in my AWS environment that is malicious. I need to lean in and pay attention. So those are a few different areas. If CloudTrail was set up properly in a customer's environment, they would have stopped us in our tracks, or at least been alerted to it and had an idea of what was going on with the attack. But that is the end of that lab, and just gave you a taste of Pwn Labs. I have a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel where I work through various labs by Pwn Labs. So if you enjoyed it, you can check those out there. Would encourage you to create your own Pwn Labs account. Real quickly, before we end the video, I will show you some of the many free labs that are on here. So we can see all of this, right? Free, 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 free. We have some premiums, free, free, free. Load more labs, load more labs. We got a lot of premiums now. But, oh, there's a bunch of free labs right there. As I think there's over 40 completely free labs on Pwn Labs that you can do right now. Create a Pwn Labs account, no sub, no credit card, and you can go through these labs and learn some of this cloud pen testing. Free AWS, Azure, and GCP labs. But hey, for all of you who went through this video with me, thank you for hanging out. Hope you learned something about AWS pen testing, something about API gateways, something about CloudTrail, something about Pacu, something about the command line, something about how to use ChatGPT. I don't know. Hopefully you learned something through this process and of me sharing my methodology. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.